Greetings. I am here today to talk to you about a couple of different things, but before we start the talking head presentation, I want to introduce myself. My name is Susan Kosh, and I am currently located in a remote area in Blackfoot Territory, which is near the US-Canada border, or what they call the medicine line. The Blackfoot call the medicine line. So yes. And today I'm going to talk about two things. I'm here in my virtual studio with my trusty pet cat. You may have heard that cat noise saying hi. Lucky cat saying hi. So yes. I'm here in my virtual studio, and we have hanging up on the wall a picture of the CEO of Personal AI, Suman Kanagenji, and we also have a picture on the wall of Sharon Zhang, the CTO of Personal AI, who is scaling the walls of anti-Indigenous ideology. Well, at least that's how I see it. I know she is a rock climber. So the challenge of creating AI for the people is in her hands and guided, of course, by Suman's vision. And together, actually, I have a third partner who's a UX designer like myself, UX designer, and the three of them triangulating in the, what do they call it, mastermind three, are creating Personal AI. But before we talk about anything related to Personal AI, I'm again introducing myself, Susan Kosh, and I am, in addition to being a UX designer and researcher, a social information architect, and I'm the founder of 3 Times Ethical. So that is my consulting firm, and we are basically advancing technology, in this case, Personal AI, the technology of Personal AI, with deliberate values and positive behavior. So today I want to talk about two articles, one from 2018, published in a journal by 4 Indigenous New Media Artists out of Montreal. The title of that is Making Kin with Machines. And then the second article that I want to read is related to technology in South Africa. And it's called Technology Students in Africa, Bolstered by Grassroots AI. So bolstered meaning structure, the foundation. So it looks, according to this article, which was published January the 4th, 2024, written by Susan D'Agostino. Yes, so those two I'm going to compare before I begin with respect to the first one, Making Kin with Machines. These Indigenous artists quote an elder in the Blackfoot territory known as Leroy Little Bear, who I had the honor to meet when I was attending a lecture given by the Blackfoot people of the Kainai Reserve, the Standoff Reserve, in their Environmental Protection Agency, their EPA. They had a yearly gathering, and this one was up in Waterton, where Leroy Little Bear spoke mostly about stars and cosmology. Nevertheless, he is also one of the key treaty signers for the Buffalo Treaty, which was signed, gosh, I think it's about 7, maybe almost 10 years ago, between US and Canada, all along the Rocky Mountains, which they call the the backbone of the world, which is the, wait for it, the Rocky Mountains. The settlers call Rocky Mountains, but the Blackfoot people call it the backbone of the world. So, you know, me being an artist, first and foremost, at some point, I love that metaphor. Just absolutely Mother Earth. The backbone is the Rocky Mountains, which run all the way from north, I believe, Alaska, all the way down almost to Mexico, along the western territories of so-called Canada, United States. Yes, so I said to myself at one point, because I love this metaphor, I was like, if the backbone of the world is the Rocky Mountains, and then what is the belly button of the world? Like, what is the front? So I took a nice round globe, which I don't have here right now, but I found the backbone of the world, and then I spun it around and I looked at the front. And guess which continent is at the front if you use the backbone as the back? Yes, Africa. So anyhow, today, just before we get started on those two articles, I wanted to share this magazine, which I picked up in Lethbridge, called, it's actually from the Lethbridge College. This is the fall edition, but this particular edition is mostly dedicated to the New Buffalo, which Blackfoot people call the Ini, I-I-N-I-I. I'm just going to share a little bit from this magazine. Here you see a nice photograph of what's happening at a graduation. Looks like an African woman with Indigenous roots graduated from Lethbridge College, seen on campus. But today I'm just going to show you how important the treaty is that Leroy Little Bear signed with, along with many other elders, of course. So this magazine is in honor of the Ini. So that's how you spell it, I-I-N-I-I. That's the word spelt. And if I could just read this, sorry, read upside down and backwards. This quote here says, "The answers are in the stories. Which stories are the reminders? Which path are you going to choose? Which path are you going to take?" So yeah, here we have some of the buffalo. The story behind this is so awesome. These buffalo were actually flown in by helicopter, I believe from Montana, flown up to I think the Banff National Park, and dropped individually into the highlands, up really high up in the mountains. And then over the years, they've been slowly migrating down into the lowlands or the prairies. So I have yet to see any of these herds, but it's only a matter of time. Here's another image, the journey of the Aini buffalo. These are the Blackfoot people that live in this area, many of whom I know pre-pandemic, when I would go out on the land a lot and go to ceremony, go to events. This is actually an ally, a biologist, who's working with the Blackfoot people. Here is the gift of the Aini. And this gentleman who is creating the gift, which is called a winter count, his full name is William Singer III, a very good friend of mine and an artist, well-renowned artist in the Blackfoot Confederacy. Here he is making the markings on, I believe, a hide. Yes, so that is my friend William, who is a very excellent Indigenous artist. Here's some more living together. This is the, I don't think this is a signing of the treaty, but some acknowledgement. Oh, and here is Dr. Little Bear. Okay, Dr. Little Bear, not just Leroy Little Bear. Can you see him there? one of Canada's most respected academic voices, leading the effort to educate communities about buffalo and the Buffalo Treaty. Goes on to talk and give stories, buffalo stories, and then talks about the buffalo harvest, which I had the honor to attend. Actually have a painting about the buffalo harvest. Maybe I'll share that one day. It's out in my studio, my real studio. This is my virtual studio. Yeah, and this is a beautiful magazine. Goes on to talk about the four Ini bulls, the significance of the Ini, Buffalo Stone blessing. Buffalo Stone blessing. And the story of the Buffalo Stone. I've actually painted a buffalo stone too. Who knew? Look at me. I have been here all the time. Story of the Buffalo Stone. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the Buffalo Bison Burger. I actually did UX design based on a mock-up of a Buffalo Burgers chain in Lethbridge, but hey, that was back in the day when I was still doing my UX training and design. So yes, we're going to do these two articles today in my virtual studio. Okay, so let's take a look at this article called Making Kin with Machines, published in 2018. It was an essay competition winner, published in JODS journal. Let's see, what journal is that? Journal of Design and Science. Unfortunately, they ceased operations in 2019. But they did say the worlds of design and science are inexplicably linked. Science is informed by design. Design is science. The interactions between the two are subtle, powerful, and often unrecognizable. Interesting, considering the fact that I was inspired to become an information architect through a journal called Leonardo, which came out of MIT way back in the day. Actually, I believe they're still operational. It was a journal of science, actually technology and art, kind of two broader categories. Now, of course, it's design and science. Art has been reduced to design. No, I know design is a real thing, but art is the philosophy, the ethics, the communication, and of course, technology, well, and science. Anyhow, we won't get into those categorical terms, but I found an article in which someone said artists are more interested in managing and arranging information than they are in personal expression. It's like, oh, it's just when I was about to leave art school, so I made a Xerox copy of it, put it in a real file folder, and carried it around with me for many, many, many years. Probably still have it in my paper somewhere in my other studio, my other real life studio. But yes, so it's an interesting correlation. Now here we are, 2018 article on making kin with machines in a similar magazine. So let me begin. It's written by Jason Edward Lewis, Neil Annie Artista, Archer P. Chawais, and Suzanne Kite. So forgive me if I'm butchering, mispronouncing your names. But let me begin here. Quote, "Man is neither height nor center of creation. This belief is core to many Indigenous epistemologies. It underpins ways of knowing and speaking that acknowledge kinship networks that extended to animals and plants, wind and rocks, mountains and oceans. Indigenous communities worldwide have retained the languages and protocols that enable us to engage in dialogue with our non-human kin, creating mutually intelligible discourses across differences in material, vibrancy, and genealogy." Blackfoot philosopher Leroy Littlebear observes, "The human brain is a station on the radio dial parked in one spot. It's deaf to all the other stations, the rocks, trees, rocks, animals, rocks, trees, simultaneously broadcasting stars across the whole spectrum of sentience. As we manufacture more machines with increasing levels of sentient-like behavior, we must consider how such entities fit within the kin network, and in doing so, address the stubborn Enlightenment conceit at the heart of Joy Ito's resisting reduction manifesto, that we should prioritize human flourishing. Now, I believe Joy Ito is of Japanese descent and did a lot of work in American tech companies. And in his manifesto, Ito reiterates that what Indigenous peoples have been saying for millennia: ultimately, everything interconnects. And he highlights Norbert Wiener's warnings about treating humans beings as tools. Yet, as much as he strives to escape the box drawn by Western rationalist traditions, his attempt at radical critique is handicapped by the continued centering of the human. This anthropocentrism procentrism permeates the manifesto, but is perhaps most clear when he writes approvingly of the IEEE developing, quote, design guidelines for the development of artificial intelligence around human well-being, and the emphasis is on human. And in such reference, it is such references that suggested to us that Ito's proposal for extended intelligence is doggedly narrow. We propose rather an extended circle of relationships that includes the non-human kin, from network daemons to robot dogs to artificial intelligence, weak and eventually strong, that increasingly populate our computational biosphere. By bringing Indigenous epistemologies to bear on the AI question, we hope in what follows to open new lines of discussion that can indeed escape the box. We undertake this project not to diversify the conversation. We do it because we believe that Indigenous epistemologies are much better at respectfully accommodating the non-human. We retain a sense of community that is articulated through complex kin networks anchored in specific territories, genealogies, and protocols. Ultimately, our goal is that we, as a species, figure out how to treat these non-human kin respectfully and with reciprocity, and not as mere tools or worse, slaves to their creators. It is critical to emphasize that there is no one single monolithic, homogeneous Indigenous epistemology. We use the term here in order to gather together frameworks which stem from territories belonging to Indigenous nations on the North American continent and in the Pacific Ocean that share some similarities in how they consider non-human relations. We also wish to underline that none of us are speaking for our particular communities or for Indigenous peoples in general. There exists a great variety of Indigenous thought both between nations and within nations. And we write here not to represent, but to encourage discussion that embraces the multiplicity. We approach this task with respect for our knowledge keepers and elders and welcome feedback and critique from them as well as the wider public. North American and Oceanic Indigenous epistemologies tend to foreground relationality. Dr. Little Bear says, in the Indigenous world, everything is animate and has spirit. All my relations refers to relationships with everything in creation. Knowledge is a relationship one has to all my relations. These relationships are built around a core of mutual respect. Dakota philosopher Vine Deloria Jr. describes this respect as having two attitudes. One is the acceptance of self-discipline by humans and their communities to act responsibly towards other forms of life. The second is the attitude is to seek and to establish communications and covenants with other forms of life on a mutually agreeable basis. The first attitude is necessary to understand the need for more diverse thinking regarding our relationship with AI, and the second to formulating plans for how to develop that relationship. Indigenous epistemologies do not take abstraction or generalization as a natural good or a higher order of intellectual engagement. Very interesting. I remember as a youth, just to digress here, reading about abstract. It was a book, it was a novel, a classic about how she became or how she felt very abstracted, of course, European. So I really, really resonate with that, I'll read it again. Indigenous epistemologies do not take abstraction or generalization as a natural good or a higher order of intellectual engagement. Relationality is rooted in context, and the prime context is place. Context, context, context. Yeah, so they go on to say, there is a conscious acknowledgement that particular worldviews arise from particular territories, and the ways in which the push and pull of the forces at work in that territory determine what is most salient for existing in balance with it. Knowledge gets articulated as that which allows one to walk a good path through the territory. Language, cosmology, mythology, and ceremony are simultaneously relational and territorial, which are the means by which knowledge of the territory is shared in order to guide others along a good path. One of the challenges for Indigenous epistemologies in the age of the virtual is to understand how the archipelago of websites, social media platforms, shared virtual environments, corporate data stores, multiplayer video games, smart devices, and intelligent machines that compose cyberspace is situated within, throughout, or alongside, to row flow, the terrestrial spaces Indigenous peoples claim as their territory. Here. In other words, this is a question from Indigenous peoples, how do we as Indigenous peoples reconcile the full embodied experience of being on the land with the generally disembodied experience of virtual spaces? How do we come to understand this new territory, knit it into our existing understanding of our lives lived in real space, and claim it as our own? Good question. So yes, as I say with Peacemaker AI, Indigenous peoples have the answers. What are the questions? Yeah, so I'm going to leave the link. I'm not going to read the last part. It breaks down into specific cultures and their worldviews. But if you want to read those, please click on the link below and enjoy yourself or challenge yourself or... Okay, so let's move along here to the second article that I would like to examine and share with you. So this one comes from Inside Higher Ed under the Tech and Innovation Artificial Intelligence keywords. It came out January the 4th, 2024, so hot off the press, so to speak. And the title is Technology Students in Africa, Bolstered by Grassroots AI. So I've curated this one and we're going to go through it, and I'm going to share with you some highlights of this article. It's a long read. Written by Susan DeGastino. And she writes to start, pull quote, amid South Africa's perfect storm of few universities, radical inequalities, and economic disparities, AI students find support in a not so grassroots movement. Not exactly sure what that means, but I do know the Blackfoot meaning of grassroots, which is literally the people, the grassroots. Typically not aligned with the political leaders, but just the everyday people, or the commoners in a European context, but grassroots is an indigenous, I believe, phrase. So she writes, coming from Muldersdrift, South Africa, the University of Johannesburg might have selected Joburg rather than the bush for the most recent South African conference for artificial intelligence research focused on human-centered AI. Interesting, because the first conference that I attended on AI was in 2017 in Vancouver at the Information Architect, then it was called the Summit, which is largely composed of Americans. I'd say at least 90%, maybe 5% Europeans, and maybe a handful of so-called Canadians, of which I am a Canadian settler. So, and it was focused on keeping the human in AI. So this is something I've been thinking about since, well, before that, but really since 2017 with respect to my practice as an information architect, particularly a social information architect. 17, so 5 years, for a good 5 years, I've sort of been in that headspace. So she goes on to write, quote, after all, the city of Joburg would have offered convenience for attendees from around the continent and beyond. Also, humans are decidedly not at the center of the Gauteng province's red dirt landscape. Here, rhinos, giraffes, hippos, zebras, baboons, antelope, warthogs, ostriches, wildebeests, hyenas, and cheetahs rule. But the cradle of humankind, the patho-anthropological site with the world's largest concentration of human ancestors, remains. It's a short drive away from Muldersdrift. Hominin fossils found there date back 3.5 million years. On that spot, Homo erectus first used fire 1 million years ago. So the birthplace of fire, interesting, sparking the grassroots AI. Under the sun's relentless glare, humanity's long evolution timeline feels palpable. Finding a responsible AI path forward for all living things feels urgent. And then she says, in North America, Turtle Island, big tech drives AI, argued one of the attendees, a South African research engineer who works at Google DeepMind in London. In Europe, government policy largely drives AI, he said, but in Africa, the current boom is driven by what many call here grassroots AI. It's a broad church, says a professor of computer science at the University of Pretoria. A broad church, interesting. Church. Interesting choice of words. And he was speaking of the self-organized continental network of AI students, professors, researchers, industry practitioners, entrepreneurs, and even enthusiasts who offer mutual homegrown support for accelerating AI in Africa. Given the perfect storm of, we already read this quote, too few universities and so on, one of the attendees goes on to say, we stretch our institutions in multiple ways. Anybody can help you at any time. There's no university, private sector, business, or government on this continent that is as far ahead as grassroots AI. Wow, good to know. But what started as a grassroots effort, of course, has attracted the attention from big tech AI like Google, Apple, and OpenAI. Now, the challenge, of course, is to ensure that African AI researchers are, in the words of a prominent gathering on the continent, not only observers and receivers of the ongoing advances in AI, but active shapers and owners of these technological advances. Then the article goes on to talk about demographics, and university attendance, and who's, who's in, who's there, who can afford it. But the bottom line, of course, is there's a lot of history, especially with a population that has gone through colonialism. People self-organize and say, this is not okay. We need to fix it. We can't wait for somebody to give us permission to exist. Also, they go on to talk about other inequalities in the university settings, which we will not linger on, but there are things like uh, uh, infrastructure, Wi-Fi, electricity, computing curricula, just the very basics of what information will be taught. But they will persist building AI capacity one student at a time. So most of the professors, students, and industry researchers spoke at the conference hailed from the continent. Some reported a curiosity-driven AI research born from their local setting. And of course, she mentions this in South Africa alone, there's 11 official languages: English, Afrikaans, Zulu, Xhosa, and 7 others. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but yeah, so several of the established and rising computer scientists presented research on augmenting AI data for low resource languages. I don't know what low resource languages means. I would just say languages, but anyhow, yeah, and then it talks about ways that AI will be used, the usual, we're talking about education, poverty, political issues, social issues, and of course, medicine um, issues. So one of the attendees says, we need to show up with our relationship with the West as equals, not one in which the West sees us as a charity case, or worse, as a testing ground for their technology, or one in which they can exploit or extract resources from Africa. Because we already know, as I've done in a former video, you can go back and take a look on what happened in Kenya with OpenAI exploiting Kenyan workers, just like back in the day, just giving them like a 146 an hour to traumatize them through imagery that is, at the best of times you would never want to see, never mind as a job just over broke. Give me a break. Okay, one of the reasons I don't really like ChatGPT is that kind of ethics is not for me, people. So anyhow, this same individual says, because of the geopolitics, we can't walk. We have to sprint. Go back to my earlier video where you see the Black Panther running across the landscape in Africa. Yes, you need to sprint, people. So the rise of grassroots AI. So they talk then about the economic disparity, how hard it is to get AI training, and of course pay for it. And imagine trying to get a PhD. All those AI skills can earn, and of course, how much they can make if they get that. Yada yada. Then they do mention that across the AI map of Africa, there appears to be many different hotspots with different skill sets, like the Tanzanians in AI, he said, are very entrepreneurial, and they often offer expertise in building and scaling electronics and AI startups. Ugandans, on the other hand, have specific strengths for AI and the Internet of Things, and so on. So he says that there are, a network supporting each other, bringing up different balancing skill sets. So then she returns to definition: grassroots AI as a term and a phenomena, both a term and a phenomena, was an open secret at the conference. 2 South African computer scientists employed in the industry, for example, mentioned that they had served as the primary dissertation advisors for several African computer science doctoral students focused on AI. And then didn't get paid for it, but more, volunteering to guide African AI students. Good. They're tech stewards, good tech stewards. That's what we like to see. Then we have another attendee, Benjamin Sturgeon, a master's student at the University of Cape Town. Hey, who's interested in adding moral reasoning to machine learning agents? Interesting. So let me share my screen at this point, because he actually mapped out, I guess, his vision or his visualization, shall we call it, of, oh, this is the wrong one, sorry. Get the better one. Whiteboard, let's share it now. The wrong whiteboard. Excuse me. Sorry, I had this set up. Here we are. Here we are. It's in another tab, which I wasn't accessing. So forgive me for that. Let me just do it one more time. Excuse me. Allergies. So here we go. Finally. I'm going into my Canva account because I want to be able to show you this mapping of information. Zoom in on it. So there's a quote below it, very relevant with respect to ethics. So there is a sense that AI ethics is not our problem, that people in the first world are working on it, says Ben Sturgeon, a computer science master's student at the University of Cape Town, during his talk, in which he took notes on the whiteboard. So yeah, and that photo was taken by the author of this, Susan DeGastino, who works for Inside Higher Ed. So let's take a closer look. Let's zoom in on what he was mapping. What was Ben mapping here? So interesting enough, of course, at the top, he's defining, let's see if I can get this. I hope that's showing well for you. Anyhow, I'm trying to get in as close as possible. So he's mapped out along the left-hand side some key questions and categories. The first one being, what is the problem? Identify the problem. Then the alignment problem, the classic AI alignment problem to be solved. Then he talks about AGI, artificial general intelligence, and a policing system, 2 parts, maybe to the policing system. What models are being developed, asking the question, and then defining that or stating that it's an infinite problem space. Yeah, so when we look at what is the problem, it's very interesting that he's focusing, or he's got the word social technology here as a social information architect. Yes, totally. There's a social dilemma to be governed for real. And the alignment problem to be solved, of course, has to do with human rights and core values, the social political space, and the AI self. No harm to humans. These are some notes underneath there. AI self-policing, I guess it says. Interesting idea, policing yourself, but 2 parts. You need to check the solution, produce a solution, check whether it's within the safe bounds of, produce a solution, stick to the low. Not sure what that refers to, but what models are being developed, ensure that the dependable, reversible, there are versatile policies. And then, of course, the infinite problem space with respect to, I think he's saying gaming, specification, gaming, or red teaming. Not sure, but the last line here with the infinite problem space, align to value in specific environments. Hey, making kin with machines. Boom. Yeah, so anyhow, let's continue to look at this article. So that's a great mapping by a student at this particular conference, which was shared on the whiteboard. And basically that's probably core to Grassroots AI. He says, Sturgeon says, I had to create this niche for myself. Interesting. Social information architect. It is really a niche. I've yet to find anyone on the planet who identifies as a social information architect. If you know of anyone out there, please add in the comments so I can connect with them and we can work together as a team. I beg you. So anyhow, Sturgeon says, I had to create this niche for myself. He said of his research interests at the intersection of computer science and philosophy. Art philosophy in South Africa, he says, there is a sense that AI ethics is not our problem and that people in the first world are working on it. Wow. Please, let's not go there. In short, Grassroots AI seeks to create a bubble in which computer science students can focus on their research. Well, I know of a good bubble. It's called personal AI. You can put all your research notes in it and then train your own AI to help you in your bubble. But if we don't, he says, only very privileged people making the choice to spend 3, 4, or 5 more years preparing to lead AI. He says this grassroots thing is important. It heals and removes bumps so that people can just be. Here. Yes. So yeah, so that is basically the conference. Let's see what else. Someone at the conference had to say, we see people across Africa, just scrolling down, do amazing things with internet and technology for themselves and their communities and the world. AI has great potential, yada, yada, but we need to think bigger, much bigger. Think big. Yes, think different. Just think. So, yeah, so they interview a politician who apparently is at peace with his role in promoting or advancing AI. Good. Tech Stewart stars for him. And yeah, so then it sort of wraps up and Susan writes, on the road back to the Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg, fruit stands overflow with watermelons and billboards advertising the likes of Galaxy Z flip phones. A lot has transpired in science since Homo erectus discovered fire. By the roadside, herds of grazing zebras and wildebeests mirror the collective spirit of the emerging and established African AI researchers amid the current tech boom. Wildebeests who can smell rain miles away help zebras find water. Zebras who have excellent eyesight help wildebeests spot predators. Zebras also feed on the top of the grasses, while the wildebeests prefer the lower parts, ensuring that they both thrive without competing for resources by traveling side by side in a symbiotic relationship. To row flow. They also strengthen in numbers against predators. So it wraps up by saying it's not for us Africans to win the AI race. This particular Mar-Evat said, confiding that he's heard from senior researchers at world universities who are surprised to learn that South Africa has roads. It's for us to be counted. Yes, stand up and be counted. Train your own personal AI just at the very outset, the very least. You can't get more grassroots than personal AI. So that wraps up the 2 articles. And as you can see, comparing and contrasting between the 2, there are a lot of similarities, a lot of common ground. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me subscribe, give me a thumbs up, comment. I will not block you. I am not the kind of person that blocks people unless it's very, very rarely. Because we seek to reason. Well, anyhow, block, share, like, comment, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.